Welcome to the Big Seance podcast. I'm Patrick Keller of BigSeance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the seance.
You know how record labels will sometimes release remastered recordings from artists or bands from the 70s or the 80s, where they pull apart the individual pieces and tracks, improve the sound, hopefully, and then put it all back together again? Well, this week we take a look back at two different related interviews of guests that you may have missed. One is from 2017 and the other is from 2019. These aren't the complete interviews, so if you want to check out the full episodes, I'll put those links in the show notes. But I've done my best to clean them up a bit and kind of remaster the old audio. First up will be highlights from episode 83 with Roberta Grimes, Afterlife expert and author of The Fun of Dying. Then, highlights from episode 144 with Sandra Champlain, author of We Don't Die. In these first highlights with Roberta, I brought in our friend the Crow to let you know when a new clip is starting. And I'm thirsty, so let's pour 2 cups of tea today, shall we? Once before each guest. Here we go. Roberta Grimes is a business attorney who has spent decades studying nearly 200 years of abundant and consistent communications from the dead, quantum mechanics, and the nature of consciousness, and she shares what she's learned about what actually is going on in an enjoyable and easily understood trilogy: The Fun of Dying, The Fun of Staying in Touch, and The Fun of Growing Forever. Other books include Liberating Jesus, Flying High in Spirit, and My Thomas. Roberta has been a guest on hundreds of radio programs. She hosts her own live show called Seek Reality on the BBM Global Network, and podcasts of previous Seek Reality shows are available for free on webtalkradio.net and on iTunes. Her website is robertagrimes.com. I hope you are ready for this lady's energy. Okay, Paranerds, I'm excited for today because our guest is here in the parlor because of you, actually. Several of you in the last year have contacted me telling me about this wonderful author and researcher and podcast host named Roberta Grimes. And I want to specifically credit Mac Connor and Jill Whitley because they were the first to draw my attention to Roberta and her work. And since then, I've read her very popular book, The Fun of Dying, and I'm now a regular listener of her live show, which is also a podcast. I listen to the podcast version, called Seek Reality. Welcome, Roberta.
I'm so glad to be with you. We're going to have so much fun with this.
I know. I've been so excited all morning. I even woke up about an hour early this morning with questions going in my head. Oh my gosh, I can ask her this. I can ask her this.
I'm here. Whatever you'd like to know, I'm happy to try to help you get the answers.
Oh, good. You're wonderful. Well, I almost just don't know where to start with you. You are someone who I wish I would have had on the show a long time ago, and I'll tell you why. For the most part, and we talked about this a little earlier, for the most part, I wasn't interested in any of this nerdy stuff until around 10 years ago when I had a spiritual shift, and I'm sure the listeners get tired of me
talking about that, which led to being obsessed with books by psychics and mediums and looking for answers to questions like what happens when we die? What exactly does the other side look like? Do spirits reach out to communicate to us? And can we communicate with them? And this is what you do. You've basically answered all of those questions for me already, right?
Well, I try to answer them for myself, and when I discovered that they were answerable, I began to write the books because everyone should know this stuff. It should be basic that everyone knows it.
In the back of your book, The Fun of Dying, you include a massive list of suggestions for further reading, and that led me to Our Unseen Guest by Darby and Joan, which I'm reading now. I'm about halfway through.
I love that. Yes.
But you must have done absolutely nothing but read for several years because you reference a lot of great books.
Well, what happened was that because I had unusual experiences as a child, I was trying to understand my experiences. And then in 1975, Dr. Raymond Moody published his wonderful Life After Life. That's where he coined the term near-death experiences. But he started a flood of interest, very early interest in this generation, in death and the afterlife. And there started to be a lot of books. So by the early 80s, I was doing what you went through a few years ago. I was reading as much as it was my entire hobby. I'm an attorney. I still practice law. So I have a day job and I've got kids and grandkids, and a husband of 44 years. But every waking minute that I was not doing something with or for my clients or my family, I was reading. And you know just how addictive that is because each book has a bibliography and they lead you to other books which have bibliographies. And that's how I was able to pull it all together, because eventually I learned that late 19th and early 20th century, first 20 or 30 years of it, Darby and Joan are part of that period. We had some wonderful channeled material and stuff that came through deep trance mediums and hundreds of communications from people in southern England and the United States, eastern part mostly. And it all was so consistent. They all had been to the same place, different experiences. It's a big, complex place, but that's when I knew this was real. So by the mid-'80s, I knew it was real. And then from then on, I was just trying to figure it out.
Well, and the 70s and early 80s, wasn't there kind of another boom in this, genre of writing?
Yes, that's what first made me know it was possible to understand what actually is going on, because we know something is there. Everyone has encountered enough strange stuff to know that there's some bigger reality we're missing. And it's possible, I've discovered, really to figure out most of it with a few little caveats. Most of our eternal mind is not accessible to us while we're in bodies. It's sort of like we're coming to the gym to have an Earth lifetime, and we strip down to our gym clothes, which is a very reduced subset of our great eternal mind. And so with that sort of limited mind, it's hard for us to wrap our minds around some of the larger concepts. But we can pretty much approximate doing that. And when you know that the answers are all there and they're accessible, it's just impossible not to keep trying to find them.
Well, I have so many questions for you, but I think it's like I said, I don't know where to go next, but I think it's important for my listeners to know how it all began for you. And you mentioned this briefly a few seconds ago, but you had some wild, as you said, experiences as a child. Just tell us about that first.
In April of 1955, I was 8 years old and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I think it was probably about 4 a.m. actually, and I realized that there is no God, and I was terrified. Little Christian child, suddenly there's no God? And in the midst of my terror, I couldn't even move. I was so paralyzed with fear. In the midst of it, there was a flash of white light in my room, just a flash. And a young male voice said, "You wouldn't know what it is to have me unless you knew what it is to be without me. I will never leave you again." Now, of course, when you're 8, everything surprises you, so basically nothing does. My thought at the time was, I remember this vividly, if you forget there's a God, they remind you, and I went back to sleep. But I never told anyone what had happened to me. I knew it was real. It was as real as anything that ever had happened. And I assumed it was normal. And I'd learn about it at some point. I even majored in early Christian history in college, just because I figured by the time you get to college, they'll tell you what happens when you forget there's a God and how they remind you. But I never asked a question, so I never got an answer. So then when I was 20, I came home from my summer job one evening feeling pretty glum. Broad daylight, sitting up on my bed. The same thing happened over my right shoulder and splashing in the room, the same white light. And the same voice said, "I will never leave you." And there was even music with it this time. So that's what made me know, of course, it was real. What had happened to me when I was 8 was not my imagination. And that was when I decided I had to figure it all out. So it started for me when I was 20, and it was another 10 years before I began to even come across information that I could put together. But that's why. I mean, I had to find out what had happened to me, and it led me to all of this.
That is amazing. Some of us try so hard in adulthood to get experiences like that. And you were just handed that at 8. That's cool.
Yes. But see, now I know why. I mean, before I came into this lifetime, I made a deal with my primary guide that I was going to write a book, which he had wanted to write and actually had written, but had not published during one of his lifetimes. And he has guided me through my whole life to have the experiences. And that was his voice, of course, that I heard. And he has guided me to have these experiences and to write these books. Basically, I'm sort of like his avatar. I thought I had a separate life, but I really don't. And I'm perfectly content with that now. But some of us do this. Some of us have made deals with our primary guides or with others that we're going to do certain things. And my primary guide is someone whose name, should I say who he is?
I was going to say a few people might know him.
Yes, they might have heard of him. In his next to last lifetime, he was Thomas Jefferson, which explains why I was obsessed with Thomas Jefferson as a child. Mm-hmm. I've always been interested in him. So when I learned just 2 years ago that he was the one behind all of this, it didn't surprise me as much as perhaps it should have. But I just wrote a blog post about reincarnation, and that's something people might want to check out because reincarnation is a complex thing, and I don't like it, so therefore I haven't researched it as much as I might. But coming to know a reincarnated being about whom there's information, well, he's not reincarnated, he's now beyond incarnating, but I know somebody, but I also know one of his lifetimes pretty well. And it's interesting to see how he's the same, but he's also a different person. He has very little interest in that lifetime. You or I would care, but he doesn't care. Mm-hmm. He's gone to something else altogether now. He was very spiritual. And when he was an old man, he wrote a book about Jesus and about spirituality that he didn't publish because he said the time wasn't right. And of course, he would have, if this book had come out then, it probably would have destroyed his reputation. And that was something you don't want to do when you're old and famous. But that was why I came in, so I could write his book. And I did. And it was channeled, and it came out in 75. I mean, what am I saying? 75. You see where I'm living now. I'm living in the past. It came out just 2 years ago, and it's called Liberating Jesus. So that I thought was the end of it, but it turns out not to be. It was just the beginning, and he's sort of driving my train completely now.
I didn't realize that you had 2 books channeled through him. How does that work? How does the information come out?
Can I tell you something humiliating?
Do, please.
Everything I've ever written, I now realize has been channeled.
Ah.
I really, if I have tried to write independently, I've gotten an idea or someone has really given me an idea and I've tried to write it. I can't write a word. But everything I've written has come from Thomas's team. And it's all been part of his big project. So I just go along with it. I'm sort of like, I feel bad for him that he's reduced at this point to dealing through me, of all people. But I'm doing my very best for him. He knows that.
So I guess it's similar to the inspiration people talk about with like musicians and savants and stuff like that.
Yes. That my muse led me to do this or that, or I had this idea and it came to me, and as you say, with music. I sat down at the piano and I typed it all out and wrote it out, and please, people, that's not from you. That's from your guides. We all have guides. And if part of what we have signed up to do is write music or write books or or teach or do something that our guides want to have done, we signed up for the deal. We said, yeah, I'll come and do it. Roger, we saluted and we got into a body. But it's not from us. And it's humbling, but it's freeing in a way. I don't think he's going to let me make a mistake. So even though some of what I'm writing now is very daring, I think it's what he wants.
You said something a few minutes ago about how you don't like reincarnation. What's that about?
Well, as you can imagine, when I was a child, a young adult, I was very Christian. I was extremely Christian, the most Christian person you've ever known, until I was in my early 50s. And that's one of the things Christians don't believe in. But what happened to me was that I've been doing all this work. And while I'm doing it, I'm also reading the Bible. I read the Bible cover to cover 6 or 8 times and the New Testament twice as many times. So I was really familiar with the Bible. And I was trying so hard in all my research to find anything that suggested to me that what I had believed as a Christian, or still then believed, was true. And I finally, in my early 50s, had to accept the fact that absolutely none of it was true. And that was very hard. I'll have to tell you, I put away my Bible for a couple of years and I stopped going to church, but it was really a crisis of the soul because, could you go to hell for having discovered there is no hell? This is a sort of conundrum I was wrestling with back then. And finally, one day, I decided even though I didn't want to test the Lord, I had to get rid of what was going on in my mind around and around. And I thought he had said a lot of this stuff. So I picked up my Gospels and I read just the Gospels. I didn't read the rest of the Bible with it, which is what, most Christians think it's all one mush. It's not. The Gospels are genuine. Jesus tells us things in the Gospels about God, reality, death, the afterlife, and the meaning and purpose of our lives that we could not have verified in any manner until the early 20th century. It's incredible and amazing and beautiful, and it was the most astonishing and wonderful moment of my life. And everything I've done since then has been to try to help people understand that Jesus is not a religious figure. Jesus came to us from God as our teacher, and it's time we listen to him, which Christians do not do.
Well, you are a master at writing appendices in your books. And you were just talking about, the Gospels. And when I got to the end of The Fun of Dying, it even inspired a big Facebook post of mine because I was reading Listening to Jesus, where you talk about that. And as a person who has kind of been running away from a Southern Baptist, teaching growing up, it was like mind-blowing to me. And it was so comforting to read that. And I posted it on Facebook and was like, oh my gosh, guys, read this. Where does the dogma come from?
It comes mainly from Paul, and it comes from the Old Testament too. The problem is this. Those who were alive when Jesus was teaching were first century primitive people, like late Iron Age. They knew nothing from nothing. And they had all these beliefs that were, a little bit rightish, but they really weren't about the genuine God or the genuine reality. They couldn't have. In what other parts of our lives do we still take what people believed 2,000 years ago as, quote, gospel? No other area. And God certainly deserves more consideration than anything else. So why aren't we listening to God now? Instead, we've said, well, you said your last word 2,000 years ago. Now we're just going to, keep stuffing it down your throat. He told us not to do this. He said, no one puts a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch pulls away from the garment and a worse tear results. Nor do people put new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wineskins burst and the wine pours. I had this in front of me so I can read it. And the wine pours out and the wineskins are ruined. But they put new wine into fresh wineskins and both are preserved. That is Matthew 9:16-17. There was not a single Christian who understands what he meant. What he meant was, don't package what I'm teaching you with the Old Testament. He says in another place, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And that Christians do pay attention to, but they ignore the next line. On these two commandments, two, depend the whole law and the prophets, Matthew 22:37-40. Well, The law and the prophets was what what we call the Old Testament. He said, you can take that whole law and the prophets and put it way over there and ignore it, because it all comes down to loving God and loving your fellow man. And that's it. That's what he came to teach us. But there is not a Christian, not a professed Christian, and certainly not a Southern Baptist Christian, who would get that. And why? I mean, if you claim to love Jesus, for heaven's sake, the first thing you should try to do is understand what he came to say. But understand Paul's problem. And I don't blame him. I'm grateful to him. He preserved the teachings of Jesus for us. Mm-hmm. His problem was that Jesus's death, which I'm told by Thomas, was not even supposed to happen. It was something Jesus decided to do at the last minute almost, because he had no other way to convince people that they were eternal beings than to rise from the dead. So he did. Ta-da! That's what it was meant to do. But that death so demoralized the followers of the way, which is what Jesus called his teachings, the way. It so demoralized them that Paul had to do something. And what he did was to package those teachings in first century Judaism. What we have to this day and call Christianity is a first century Jewish sect. And that's good. But it's the wrapping. For 2,000 years, we've been enjoying the wrapping. We have not opened the gift. It's time to open the gift now. And that the gift is those gospel teachings. Sorry to be a preacher, but you got me started, Patrick, and I can't stop once I get started.
No, I love that. I am sometimes very conflicted with what I was taught growing up and being a good person and what's true and what's not. And, and sometimes in this community, as a Paranerd, we call ourselves in my community, we're very often judged. Or people want to, they want to save us or think we need some Jesus. It's comforting to hear that. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yes, I do. And think about this. We know that God is infinite love. Even Christians believe that, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody who's a parent, ask yourself, which of your own particular children would you most enjoy being horribly murdered in front of your face just so you could forgive the others for messing up the living room? That's the core of Christian teaching. Jesus came to save us from God's anger. In fact, God never shows anger. The God of the Old Testament is not the genuine God. The genuine God is it's a God that Jesus came to tell us about. He came to say to those first century Jews, you got it partly right. We do have one God. But here is what God is. God is infinitely loving spirit. And he had to speak very simply for two reasons. One was because he was talking to these primitive people, but the other was that to talk against the prevailing religion when he was teaching was an immediate death sentence. And eventually he was killed. But first, he wanted to impart to them these truths. So he used several devices. One of them was parables, and another was he would give people truths over several days of time, because the temple guards who were always listening would change, but the people, his followers, he would hoped would remember the things he had said and put them together. And if you understand the constraints under which he operated, it's easy to see what he was trying to teach us. God is loving spirit. God is infinite love. God loves you in particular more than you can possibly imagine. And there's no earthly way you would need to be saved. There is no evidence, and I've looked hard for it, that anybody ever has had a post-death effect from the death of Jesus. Jesus has never saved a single human being because it was never necessary for him to save a single human being. God does not judge us. No religious figure judges us. The actual judgment is by ourselves, and Jesus even hints at that. In the way that you judge, you will be judged. With the measure you use, it'll be meted out to you, and that's true. But it's by yourself that will happen.
You've said that learning to forgive is very important. Why is that?
Because, and I'm not the one who says it, Jesus says it, because love is the reason we're here. Learning to love more perfectly is really the basic reason we're all here. Some of us have little extra duties like I do, but many people, that's why we're here. And all the terrible things that happen are lessons in love. But because of our human nature, because of the fact that we forget who we are while we're here, this limited little shell, People will hold grudges, will be angry, and all of those negative feelings get in the way of love. So until we forgive, until you have learned to forgive perfectly, you really, really can't love. The third fun book is called The Fun of Growing Forever. We can't transform the world until we transform ourselves. And it literally is just a handbook for using what Jesus taught us to basically ace this lifetime. I mean, you can make this your last lifetime. All you have to do is do exactly what Jesus taught us to do. And it's not even hard. It's easy and it's fun. But until we forgive, we can't love. It's that simple. Not at all.
Many of us in this community and many of the listeners of this show like to experiment with a lot of spirit communication tools. And I also famously fail at many of them.
Yes.
Meaning most of the time I get no communication. Sometimes I do. Yeah. Most of the time I don't. And I want to ask you a question, which is actually the name of a chapter out of one of your books. And that is, why is communication between the dead and the living so difficult?
Well, we have to understand how reality is constructed. There is no solid reality at all. What you see around you is entirely empty space, which is all energy. That's all it is. So it's a great illusion, but it's an illusion. And reality is, how can I put this simply? Reality is all consciousness. Consciousness exists in a range of vibrations from lowest, which is abject fear, to highest, which is perfect love, which is, of course, the Godhead. And in that range, we, at this level of reality, have lowered our personal vibrations to be able to be at the material level, which we think may be the lowest level, we're not sure, of the consciousness-created reality that exists. And above us, but in the same place, think of your TV set. Your mind is a TV set. So right now it's tuned to that body on this level of reality. When you die, all that happens is your mind tunes to a slightly higher channel and you pick up a whole new solid reality just as if it were a TV set. It's really that simple. But what happens, though, is that we on this level are trying to communicate with a slightly higher channel. And that channel is, it's sort of like your Channel 5, I think I use this analogy in the book. Your Channel 5 newsman and your Channel 7 newsman want to share information, but they don't have a cell phone. How are they going to do it? They're both live and on air. They can't do it, right? It's not possible. Well, that's the same problem that we have when we try to communicate with the dead. Now, they can communicate with us much more easily because it turns out our minds can lower their vibrations easily, but it's hard to go higher than that to which your spiritual development is suited. So they lower their spiritual vibrations. They're around us all the time. But because we can't raise our vibrations, it's very hard to see them or to communicate with them. I don't understand why sometimes it's possible and sometimes it isn't. It has to do probably with aspects of consciousness physics that we don't yet understand. But keep in mind the fact that, people on different channels of your TV set can't communicate. And what we're trying to do, and what the dead are trying desperately now to do, is to bridge that gap. One thing that's going on is that they have begun to establish, that the dead have begun to establish communication stations high enough in the Summerland that the negative entities that exist at the lowest part of reality, right above the Earth, say, level of reality, those entities are establishing solid stations there, which are going to, they say they're laying fiber optic cable. I mean, obviously that's an analogy, but they're trying to establish solid connections, sort of like between, the East Coast and the West Coast 150 years ago. They're trying to lay that line so that it will be easy for anybody with an app on their phone to talk to Aunt Mildred, who died 50 years ago. They're working on that now. It's actually in beta, but it's not going to be available until a lot more people have helped the dead to make it happen. Anybody who's interested, by the way, in doing this, R. Craig Hogan is leading the group for the North American station, which is going to be the biggest station, and it's in English. The only one that's working really well now is in Portuguese, which is a little bit hard for English people to get. But R. Craig Hogan, how can we, I don't remember his address for this, but I'll try to find it. But one way that you can do it is to go to information@afterlifeinstitute.org. That's information@afterlifeinstitute, one word, .org. And that should be an email to him and just say, hey, I want to help work with the North American station. And he'll tell you how. And there are people getting phenomenal results. There are parents talking to their dead children right now through the North American station.
And this is when I get really nerdy, because I remember the first time I heard about these stations was reading Sarah Estep's book. And I know you know Sarah Estep.
Uh-huh.
And that is just, it blows my mind. And I think that is so cool. I've never asked a guest this question, but I think you might be a good person to ask this. I and some of my loved ones have made a sort of pact for how we'll communicate after we pass on. For example, my immediate family and my partner know that they'll need to pay close attention to their bedside tables, because my plan is to do something in that area that lets them know that I'm still here and able to communicate. But I have to be honest, because some mediums and spiritual teachers and books that I've read, have me worried that when the time comes for me to die, it'll be dangerous for me to hang back, that I shouldn't be concerned with the living at that point. I should move on out of fear that I'll miss my only opportunity to walk into that light. Is it weird to have anxiety over that?
Yeah, well, only because they've given you some unnecessary confusion. When you die, what happens is, and it's a joyous feeling. Some of the dead say it's almost an orgasmic feeling. You leave the boat anchor that was your body, and suddenly you're light and free and happy and floating in the air, and you feel immensely powerful because you're beginning to feel again your greater mind. So that's a very dangerous time, because the people around your bed are wailing and feeling for your pulse. Because what is the silver cord? What the Bible calls a silver cord? It's like it looks almost silver, and it's just a cord that has attached you to your body your whole life. Once it frays and breaks, then that body is dead, and there's nothing to do to revive it. And so you're going to want to reassure your loved ones. And that's the worst thing you can do, because you've already begun to raise your vibration, but you'll start to lower it just by paying attention to them. We all have visitors at our deathbeds, people who've died ahead of us, that our parents, our pet dog, whoever we're most likely to trust and to follow. And their job is, once we're out of our body, to get us to follow them and not to pay attention to the rest of the people in the room who still have bodies. Big tip. Follow the people who came to get them. Big tip, because we aren't sure about the process, but what seems to be the case is that if you lower your vibration enough and you can't perceive them anymore, you're basically going to be stuck outside of time in that spot. And there are enough examples of people we have discovered for whom this has happened that I just wouldn't take chances. Go with them. What happens is they will take you in the same place at a slightly higher level. They'll take you to that new channel. You'll get acclimated. You'll be happy, but you'll be very aware of the emotions and what's going on with the people you love. And that is when you're able to go back and help them. You've completed your own transition. You are safely there, and you have a much expanded mind, and it's just much easier. There also are experts there who will teach you how to communicate with the living very effectively. Mikey Morgan, who is a sixth level being, very advanced being, and had last lived in the 1600s, came back and lived a 20-year lifetime that ended in 2007. And his book, Flying High in Spirit, which I helped his mother to publish, is the best book. Anybody interested in how a young person, what is it? Flying High in Spirit, a young snowboarder's account of his ride through heaven. While he was here, Mikey learned to snowboard. To this day, he snowboards. And in fact, he showed up at a meeting I was having with Thomas not long ago. I always have to do this through a medium. And she said, "Oh my goodness, he looks like he's not a skateboard." I said, "No, he's on a snowboard." She said, "Oh yeah, he just said, how come there's no snow in this room?" So Mikey has a sense of humor. But what Mikey does, one of the things he especially enjoys doing, is teaching people who have just arrived how to communicate with their families. And a lot of the signs that happen right after a person has died are done by people like Mikey, helping your dead loved ones to give you the rainbow that you see when you leave the funeral service, or the cloud of butterflies around you, or whatever it is that's a dramatic sign. It's all wonderful. It's all positive. It's all good. That's what people have to know. Christianity is based in fear of a judgmental and angry God. There is no such thing. No such thing. The genuine God is nothing but perfect love, and especially perfect love for you in particular. People have to know that. And once they know that, really the whole world changes.
It's funny, as simple as it is, I never really thought of it in terms of lowering my vibration in a time when it's doing anything but. So crossover, get there first.
Get there.
And then learn how to communicate later.
Yes, and you can be doing it within hours. It all depends on how important it is to you. But if your own particular loved ones haven't started doing it, then don't worry about that either. There's a lot more to do there than here, and it's a lot more fun there. And people aren't prepared for that, so some people go a little crazy in the beginning with the fun part. But it's not uncommon for people who have literally just left their bodies to appear at the deathbeds. It can happen really quickly, to appear to the living. Usually, typically, they'll stand at the end of the bed, or they'll appear beside you as you're driving a car, and they'll say, "I'm fine," and then they'll disappear. There's a great story involving my dear friend, and Jefferson and John Adams both died on the 4th of July, 1826, 50 years to the day after the Declaration of Independence was theoretically signed. It was signed a few times. But Jefferson died in the morning in Virginia, and Adams died in the afternoon in Massachusetts. And there was, of course, no quick communication. Nobody knew Jefferson had died. And so Adams was almost dead. He was moribund, and he stirred, and he hadn't talked in a long time. He said, "Thomas Jefferson still survives." And soon after he died. Now, at the time, that made no sense.
Right.
But it makes sense when you realize Jefferson had already died, zooped to heaven, zooped back down to his friend and said, "Here I am, everything's going to be fine." Isn't that amazing? Isn't that neat?
That is amazing.
It's me again, speaking to you from the year 2024. Before we move on to Sandra, I wanted to let you know that the topic of suicide comes up a few times. I don't think it's anything triggering, but I wanted to be fair and give you that heads up. And I want to remind you that in the US, you can dial 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. And for international resources outside of the US, you can visit befrienders.org, and that link will be in the show notes. Now it's time for that second cup of tea. Sandra Champlain is the author of the #1 international best-selling book, We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death, and host of We Don't Die Radio and Shades of the Afterlife, with well over 600 combined episodes. She organizes online medium classes, courses, demonstrations, and the non-denominational weekly Sunday gathering. Sandra is a highly respected author, speaker, entrepreneur who is committed to make a difference in the lives of others. For more on Sandra, visit wedon'tdie.com. Hi, Sandra. Welcome to the Parlor.
Hi, Patrick. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you again.
I know. And what I've told you is that this is long overdue. Long overdue. You had me on your show in episode 152, and you've more than doubled that at this point. You've got way over 300 episodes. So it's way long overdue. And I've been a listener ever since.
You're the best. And it's perfect timing. You just got to trust with where it's for everybody. You got to trust wherever we are today is the perfect place. If we could have done it differently, we would have. So let it go. Let it go. We're here now together.
So you and I have gone through a similar journey of discovery about life after death and the fact that we don't die. Only you really took this journey seriously with years of research, writing a book, 317 interviews of We Don't Die Radio, at least at the time of this recording, traveling all over and having amazing experiences. And now you're even planning events and conferences to help others on their journey. What drives you and how do you do it?
How I do it, I don't know. I just do it. But the drive, honestly, is between the fear I had of dying so long ago. And that's what initially got me on the journey of looking for evidence very secretly. But also, I have experienced grief from death of loved ones, my dad, my grandmother, 2 beloved cats. And I know what grief feels like. And I know personally, I'm not someone who was suicidal, but I hit the darkest, deepest time of my life that I could totally understand why people would want to check out of life. And everything that I found about the afterlife is such comfort that we go on. And all it takes is just those first few people that had told me they hadn't committed suicide because of either my book or the podcast, or I have a free grief audio. And to get that the information changes lives, I can't help but keep doing it. And every interview I do is for myself as well, because one would like to think I'm a perfect human being now that I have this information. But no, I'm human, good days and bad. So every time I record an interview, it reminds me that I'm a soul having a human experience, that my life matters, that the stuff that's happening, even if it's bad, could be providing some pretty big growth for my soul and puts my life into perspective. So that's why I do it. How I do it, I'm really not sure. I just say I'm going to do it, and then I do it.
And people have to know, too, that this is not your full-time gig, that you have a career as well. And so it has to be a big passion to drive you on your free time to do all of this.
It is. I'm a chef by trade. My mom and I have a catering company, and we work with race car teams traveling the IMSA racing circuit all over the United States and one race in Canada. And it's really busy for me. So I can't often get back to listeners when they email me, but it's a labor of love and it makes a difference. So
you were talking about that fear of dying and convincing people not to commit suicide. And it reminds me of really when I first started out on my spiritual shift. And I'm pretty sure it was the first couple of books that I read on this spiritual kind of paranormal topic. And it was either James Van Prague's book, Ghosts Among Us, or it was a Sylvia Browne book. And I remember by the time I got to the end of the book, I was like, oh, I get it now. Like, and I was running away from this dogma of growing up in the Southern Baptist Church, and I was out of that. But then you have these things that are still embedded in your head about who goes to heaven and angel wings and devil horns and things like that. And it was so calming to all of a sudden come to the realization that, you know what, we're all going to cross over and all that other stuff doesn't matter. And I'm going to see my past loved ones and it'll be nice. I remember being that moment of just like, oh, and now I know.
It's a great feeling to go from hope and faith to this knowing. And, so many people send me like emails or message on Facebook and tell me what you know, because I want to believe now. And I just can't do it in an email. It's a journey for anybody. And it's really a journey worth going on. But if I could put somebody in my shoes after these 20 years and all the holy cow moments and things I've experienced, to have that comfort that our life is of purpose. But when we close our eyes that last time here on earth, hopefully we look back on our life that we've really played full out and got our money's worth out of this life, but that we can feel comforted that our loved ones will be there to greet us. I can imagine a parade and like crossing the finish line of a marathon. Everybody's there, including our pets. And something that's extra specially comforting is I've been doing some research with hospice workers that talk about how often our loved ones are there to greet us in those final moments. So many people a lot of people, I don't want to say comatose, but have been really out of it. Some even in comas have awoken and lifted their bodies, their chest out of bed, and they're looking above everybody's shoulders and they see their loved ones, angels. They're very clear who they see. And that to me is so comforting that we're not alone. Because I think even, Patrick, as much as we believe, I think maybe those final few breaths, there may still be a little bit of fear of the unknown.
Right.
And so to have our loved ones there, I think that's so comforting.
Do you remember how long it took, like that first little moment, that glimmer of, oh, you mean we don't die, and from fearing death to full on faith to where you are now? Do you remember how long that journey was of, maybe there was some skeptic part of you that was still like, I don't know about this stuff.
That skepticism is always there.
Right.
Now, and I'm sure like yourself, now that we have these shows, there's people that want to be on the show. And sometimes it's like, oh, I don't know about that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not bad to be skeptical, because I want to talk to others that are skeptics and be able to share my journey. So I think one of the biggest tipping points for me, I guess is the best way I could describe this, is I had taken a course in mediumship because the teacher had said, if you're in this course, I'll prove you're a medium. And I'm thinking, no way can anybody do that. And out of my own head, thinking I was making up, and this was the instruction. She said, we're not really going to do medium readings now. I just want you to hold hands, pick a partner, find somebody you don't know. I didn't know anybody. Close your eyes, see a big white light filled with energy around both of you. And she says, I want you to make up a story. If you could see someone standing behind your partner, who would they be, male or female? If you get a feeling it's mom's side or dad's side. And I have a great imagination. So I, with my eyes closed, told this woman that I see a man standing behind her. It's her grandfather. My imagination told me his name was Jan. He was a fisherman in Denmark. He died of lung cancer. I could say he had blue eyes and blonde hair and a big gap between his two front teeth. My imagination gives me he's puffing away on a cigarette and he died of lung cancer. And there's usually a message that comes through, and that he never told his own daughter, which would be the mother of this lady, that he loved her. So with my eyes open, I just said, I was ready to tell my partner, okay, it's your turn. And she's crying. Her grandfather's name was Jan. He was a fisherman in Denmark. He died of lung cancer. All of those things that I said were true. And that cracked open the door. And unfortunately, I went on that weekend to being right sometimes and being wrong sometimes, because a lot of this information does come in just like imagination. But then I took a course on electronic voice phenomena, which I think was the biggest tipping point that told me that it's time to tell people about this. I had taken a weekend course with Tom and Lisa Butler, who at the time it was called the AAEVP. Now it's called the A-Trans-C, Association of Trans Communications. And there were only 5 people in the class, everyone grieving the loss of a loved one. And they were teaching us how we can record white noise and voices could appear. And now this all sounded great. And I loved the examples they played. But if I didn't capture one for myself, I just couldn't be totally convinced. So in the privacy of my own cabin, I was at the Omega Center in Rhinebeck, New York. It was pouring rain outside. And I had my digital tape recorder. And I tried to do what they taught us in classroom. And that's create another energetic area, I would say. And it's all the power of our intention, which at the time I really didn't believe in, but I was going with it because they said that's what to do. And I held up my tape recorder and I just said, and I envisioned my aunt and uncle and 2 of my deceased grandparents there. And I said, if you guys are real and I'm supposed to tell the world about this, I said, I need you to really try to talk loud. So I said, I'm going to record this for 60 seconds and then I'm going to say goodnight. So I just recorded the raindrops for 60 seconds. And I played it back. And at the end of the recording, a man's voice says, good night, Sandra. And then 2 women say, good night, good night. And then there's another male's voice that says, good night. And that scared the heck out of me as much as it made me convinced. But it really hit me that, oh my gosh, are there people all around me all the time? Do I have no privacy? And this is, suddenly I wasn't sure this was fun anymore to be investigating this. And the next morning, I brought my recording into class, and the other people in the group, by hearing my audio, it helped heal their grief because they realized this wasn't coming from the teachers. This was coming from another student. And they realized if my voices were there, of my loved ones, that their son who had committed suicide or daughter that had died of cancer or spouse, that they would be alive too. So it was only then that I started really experimenting and working with people and just playing around to see if we could get voices. And we did. So that was pretty cool. But that I think was the thing. And then after that, I felt a little bit like a junkie. I had to get more. Who else is doing what? What's going on? And then that's when I started studying things like near-death experiences and really getting into evidential mediumship and reincarnation and all the things that are being captured on images and just all kinds of stuff, spirit artists, and just started diving into what else there is.
Yeah, I've had those EVP moments before, and it was also one of the first things that started that craving moment that you're talking about. You know, I've heard so many people talking about craving more information and experiences once they start getting into this stuff. Will you tell us about a day in 2011 on a day off, sitting in your car after you saw the movie 50-50, which I'd never heard of, actually. I had to look this one up.
I will tell you about that. And I think you probably feel the same way, is at some point, you know that your passion needs to be something you share with people. And I think that there's these unseen forces, whether you call it God, your spirit guides, your deceased loved ones, all of the above, that know that you can be utilized for a much bigger purpose. And I think the biggest thing any human can do here on planet Earth is to serve another person. It can be as simple as a smile. It can be something small. It can be something big, but service is the key. And I had gathered a ton of evidence about the afterlife at that point. And there's been a little voice in my head that said, you know, you could probably help a lot of people who are afraid of dying or that are grieving if you told this information to them. And everything in me, Patrick, said, I don't want to be the one to have this message. I am not smart enough. You know, I don't know how to write. If I'm supposed to write a book, I wouldn't even know how to begin to do that. I'm not the one. I'm not the one. But the voice kept saying, you are the one. And at that time, I just thought it was my subconscious or my inner voice or whatever. But I couldn't get away from meeting somebody, even sitting next to somebody on the airplane, coming to find out they're just returning from a funeral of somebody very close. It's like it was all around me. So I just felt like I had this moral responsibility, but I didn't want it. I didn't, because it's a very controversial conversation saying that there's afterlife, the reality of the afterlife. A lot of us now believe in 2019, but there's still a lot of people that give me a funny look if I tell them the name of my book. So there I was thinking, I got to be out of my own head. I'm going to go out. I'm going to see a movie. I'm going to laugh. So I looked, and a comedy, they called it a comedy. I hate when they do this, and it's really something highly emotional. But it's a movie called 50-50. They said it was a comedy. There's a couple good actors that I knew of. And I just said, oh, I'll go to that. Well, as funny as it might have been, it is a story about a young man getting diagnosed with cancer, going into the hospital, getting his chemotherapy treatments. The friends that he meets all start to die. He's faced with his own mortality. And it's a tearjerker. And I went into my car, and I had never recorded any kind of a video and hadn't really done too much with the iPhone, but I just couldn't handle all these thoughts in my head. So what I decided to do is just turn the camera onto myself and try to get out of my own brain all these feelings that I had, never having the intention to show it to anybody. So there I am saying, hi, I'm Sandra Champlain, and this is my story. And I just had to get out of me the whole fear of dying that I had, that it led me to investigate the afterlife and just so much more, the EVP recordings. And I'm crying. My hair looks bad. There's no makeup on. I just like, it's not anything that I ever was going to share. But I let it all out. And it was about 20 minutes. And I felt better afterwards. So then there I was on Facebook, and I didn't have too many friends on Facebook, but someone's father had died. And with my father having died just the year before, I knew how much my information helped me. So I said, if you promise you don't share this with anybody, I've actually told my story on this video. So I shared it with this one person. Well, didn't she know somebody that she wanted to share it with? So I said, oh, okay, just that one person. That's all you can share it with, because I look really bad in this video. And well, as it turned out, it just started to be shared. And then I thought, you know what? I'm just going to make this open to anybody. Who cares how bad I look? The words make a difference. And it's the true story of how I got into this, even my own father's death, the tough times I've had and the difference this has made. So it was just interesting to me that I never thought I'd share this information. And that darn movie that was supposed to be a comedy was the thing that said, no, you've got to be out there doing this. And it was then that I said, okay, I've got this moral responsibility, especially knowing how much it can help grieving hearts. And I can't tell you how many people write to me who have had significant losses and how much, like I said, either the show or the book or the grief audio has made a difference in people's lives. So I keep sharing, no matter how good or bad I look.
I had never seen that video until yesterday, and I followed you almost from the beginning of your show, and I've read your book, and I'm sitting here almost bawling right here, just looking at it going, how did I not know about this video? And the thing that made me realize that video was meant to happen, like that was a moment that was supposed to happen for you, is the fact that you are sitting in your car right after a movie, and you are so present and so clear and so well spoken, and it comes out as if you wrote it, the story of your journey, step by step, and it was just so perfectly laid out. And by the end of it, I was just like, wow, shut up. That was so meant to be. That moment was meant to happen. It was so cool.
Thank you. And I haven't really openly shared it. I've never advertised it that I have it, and maybe I will. This is how I got my start. So many people, especially now that I'm doing conferences, it's easy because now I've been to conferences, and whoever the conference leader is, I think, oh, they're this mega person and I can never talk to them and stuff. And it's like, no, I'm just me. I'm just me who's got a passion. I'm very, very human. And I think maybe to show that and let people know where I got my start, that would help. So I'll take that on.
Tell us about a place that's come up several times in this show and something I will always forever be jealous of. Tell us about Arthur Findlay College.
Oh, it's great. Arthur Findlay College is a college for psychic studies. And I don't even know how old it is. I know the building it's in dates back 800 years or some crazy thing like that. But some of the best mediums from all over the world got their start there. They hold weekly classes on all kinds of psychic things, many of which are within the realm of evidential mediumship. And it's just this very old, beautiful building that you stay in. There's plenty of rooms, and they have a big dining hall where we eat. And to me, it feels like the closest human beings can experience Hogwarts from the Harry Potter movies. The first time I went, and I've been there now 4 times, I was really nervous because I didn't know what to expect. Is it like the Haunted Mansion in Disney World that there's just ghosts floating around? I had no idea what to expect. And of course, the YouTube videos that people created really made it look so spooky. No, it's just a beautiful old building and wonderful tutors, all very normal people. But to be in a class, and I was in, say, the beginner's class the week I went, it just felt like psychic arts 101. So, okay, everybody close your eyes. We've got this energy and this aura around us. And, one of the exercises that we did is there were, I think, 10 of us in our class. And so 5 of us were sitting in chairs facing a wall with our eyes closed. And the instructor would have one of the other classmates behind us. And she said, okay, with your eyes closed, when the person walks into your energy, you feel them with your energy, just raise your hand when they're in, a certain space. And I thought, yeah, that's pretty cool. And she says, okay, when the person gets behind you, just tap the person, have them on your shoulders so you can feel that they're there. And then she says, I want you to just tap into their energy and say things about them. And for the person that was standing behind, if I was right in my psychic reading, 1 tap for yes, 2 taps for no, and 3 taps for I don't know. I think that's what it was. And, it's very nerve-wracking because you think it's your imagination. So I just said, okay, I feel there's a woman behind me. I got the 1 tap. I feel you have blonde hair and blue eyes. I got the 1 tap. And then the more I got into it, there were some I don't knows and some no's, but there were some really interesting things. I said, I feel like you have a black cross that's got like a crucifix on a silver chain, and there's different things about her home and things. So when it was all over, I turn around and she's wearing the black crucifix with the silver chain. And she could tell me these things about her house. But I thought, but this was all just normal, And then the next thing is the leader had a flip chart. So she drew a big circle and she put all these names in it. So she says, okay, we're going to play dead or alive. These are all my relatives.
Oh, gosh.
I'm going to point to one, dead or alive. And we just used our gut instinct and we knew if they were dead or alive. So then eventually we got onto medium readings and things, but it was just so normal. So if anybody's interested, Arthur Findlay College, I'm not sure if it's .com or .org, but there's so many different courses. It's just a lovely place. There's beautiful horses out in the pasture that you can pet. But people are normal. You don't have to be scared to go there. It's absolutely beautiful. And then to get tapped into your own soul. To be able to do these psychic and mediumship things, you realize I'm not just this body. There's so much more. And I think that's really exciting to figure out who we are and what we're capable of so we can have the best life.
That's awesome. It sounds fun. It sounds like a giant slumber party for nerds like us where you just have games like Dead or Alive.
Oh, and then the last 2 courses I went in was for trance mediumship. And I've seen people do trance demonstrations. And this particular course taught you how to do it. So I thought, well, let me just go to that. And Patrick, can I tell you, the instructors are so cool because they said, in the beginning, it could be 1% spirit world, 99% Sandra. But there's instructions how to blend with the spirit world, how to understand our spirit team around us, how to let them step into our energy field. Nobody possesses us or anything like that. But then it's to work with a partner and say, get the ball rolling by saying spirit wants to tell you, and then just keep talking, whatever comes to mind. Well, over the course of the week, in the beginning, spirit wants to tell you, and a lot of things felt like something I would say, and I was very well aware that I was saying it. By the end of the week, the more and more we sat, and it could be 15 to 20 minutes that we're blending with the spirit world before we even say anything, I had the experience that words were coming out of my mouth. When I paid attention to them or tried to listen in, they'd stop. And then when I would concentrate on my breath again, they would continue. And the granddaddy of all the experiences was at the end. The instructor said, does anyone want to demonstrate in front of the group? And I'm thinking, holy cow, I can't do that. But I raised my hand because I thought, nobody here knows me. If not now, when? And how about working through some of this fear? And again, she was great, even if it is 99% Sandra. So with my eyes closed, it could have been a good 10 minutes. I was sitting there just doing everything I had trained to do. And then I said, Spirit wants me to say. And then all of a sudden, the words kept coming out of my mouth. Again, if I tried to listen, they'd stop. So I just really concentrated on my breathing. And I was aware that words were coming out of my mouth. I was aware, because we were sitting in a big circle, I was aware that my body was turning as if to turn to each person, like I was telling a story. And then it just simply ended. I felt myself lean back in my chair, and then it was over. So when I opened my eyes, everybody's crying, very moved by whatever the words were that came out. And it was a story, something about the journey of life. And I was talking about the ocean, and this is what they were telling me. The thing that was mind blowing. I mean, it's mind blowing enough to think of words coming out that I'm not consciously figuring out. But they said I remained perfectly still. I did not turn to people. So the instructor said that was my etheric body that the person, whoever the spirit was, used, and they were moving, and I felt it. And since I've been home, many times I've done, this is just a little science project for me, is to be in front of my computer, do that blending exercise, and whatever words want to come through, use my hands and type them. So being in my skin, I feel like I hear a word, I just type, and it could come out in 2 minutes. And then I've read them back, and there's no way I could have figured out poetry. There's words I've had to look up in a dictionary or phrases. It's not normal Sandra speak, but they're very profound. And these things when I shared them on Facebook, it's one of those ones that gets shared 5,000 times because I think it hits the soul of another person. So that's something that I think anybody can do, but to know that we've got a spirit team around us is mind blowing. And I'm not present to that magic on a daily, unfortunately, because we all have day jobs. But when I think about Arthur Findlay College and I think about the 2 weeks, because I went back for a second week on this because the first week was so cool. It's wonderful. It's just wonderful.
That is amazing. Thank you for that. I will get there one day. One day.
Yeah, maybe we'll go together. We'll go on the same week.
That would be awesome.
We'd have fun.
You've experienced a lot of, whether or not you would call them seances, I'm not sure, but you've experienced several seance type of sittings with mediums. And I've heard you talking about some of the physical activity and physical phenomena that have happened in some of those experiences. Can you tell us about some of those? What physical phenomena have you seen?
Sure. It's very near and dear to my heart because on my adventure of seeing what's possible, I had heard that there are these people called physical mediums that sit in the dark and they sit in a cabinet. And out of them, when they blend with the spirit world, will exude something called ectoplasm, and that the dead people can actually step into it and become real again. So that's something that I had to experience it to believe it. I wish I could say see it to believe it, but most of it happens in the dark. So for all skeptics, it's like, oh, but it happens in the dark. And somebody's can't be real. And it's interesting because I had gone to a couple of these seances and I never told anybody I was going to seances because, you're pretty bold having the big seance podcast, but the word I think has been very much taboo. Same with the word ectoplasm, because you think of the green slimy stuff from Ghostbusters. And the thing that really gave me the confidence that it's okay to share is I read a book by Dan Aykroyd, the actor, his father, Peter, who, well, first of all, the movie Ghostbusters was written by Dan Aykroyd, and he talks about ectoplasm and things like that. But they come from a long line of spiritualists who, in the spiritualist faith, seances were a very normal thing. Families getting together, friends getting together, filled with song, filled with love, and people would materialize, and often with a dim red light, so it was just normal. So Dan Aykroyd's own grandfather had a big chest that he had all of his journals from all the seances that they had. So young Dan Aykroyd knew about afterlife. He very much believes in the afterlife. And he loved the term ectoplasm and used it for his movie. So after I found out about that, I had the backbone to share. So I've gone to a place called Banyan Retreat in the UK. And since then, I've brought the physical medium, Scott Milligan, here to the United States a few times. And he's one of my best friends. He's a really good guy. And I went to investigate what this is that happens in the dark. And if you can imagine a big circle, a cabinet, and it was just 4 walls that were black cloth. The medium sits in a chair beneath that. He's actually tied to the chair, very tight with cable ties. I've now been to maybe 20 seances. Even the most skeptical minds check out to make sure this guy cannot get out of the chair to do these things. And what I have experienced is there is phenomena as far as things floating around the room. So there's a lot of things that have glow in the dark tape on them. And so he has ectoplasm exuding from his body, and spirit children can pick up things. And there's these ectoplasmic rods that come out that can lift up trumpets and things. And while that's all fascinating, what Scott really believes in is the purpose of seances is to connect people to their deceased loved ones. He himself, his father's deceased. The family was attacked. He knows firsthand the devastation caused by grief. To reunite people with their loved ones is what it's about for him. There are pictures from other physical mediums that they have a little bit of red light on, and you can see some of this phenomena. You can see some of the ectoplasm. For Scott, what he's told me and his circle has told me is that when they've tried to do the experiments, having some light, taking pictures of the ectoplasm, while they've certainly been able to do that, what doesn't happen in those seances is loved ones don't come through. The energy isn't there to do both. So it's more important to hear a voice from beyond than to try to have people see things floating in the air. So these seances that I've been at, most of them have very similar things that happen. So Scott is a very childlike human being, and he really believes in helping children. And many times he donates, we do raffles and things like that, and we donate to Children's Hospice. So he invites spirit children to come in at the beginning of the seance. And the first seance that I experienced with him was just before Christmas. And in the center of the room, there was a Christmas tree, and there were a whole bunch of Christmas presents that were wrapped. And there were probably 25 people in the circle. And they were all people that I've spent a couple of days with now at the retreat, all very respectable people. And we're singing songs to build energy. Laughter is the biggest producer of energy. And as we're holding hands, Scott's got a spirit friend named Daniel that speaks through him, trance, actually uses his mouth. And at one point he says, the children have arrived. And Patrick, it was the feeling of like pitter patter of feet. And then all at once, all these presents got unwrapped at the same time. So if you can imagine a whole bunch of kids on Christmas morning tearing open presents, that's exactly what it sounded like. All of us are holding hands. So if anybody breaks the circle, then we had to notify somebody. So we didn't want anybody thinking that one of us are manipulating. And of course, Scott's tied down in this cabinet. Well, all of these toys start getting played with. So the glow-in-the-dark hula hoop looks like it's floating around. There's balls being thrown around. There's a piano that's being played. There's a harmonica that's being blown. There's a drum that's being pounded on, all at the same time. And then when the kids were done, they turned on a little red light so we could see, and it just looked like Christmas morning after everything was blown apart. The Christmas tree was actually outside of the circle, so they had levitated that up and over. And that was amazing. So to me, that was amazing. But then what happens is very often, and you never know what's going to happen, so you can't make any promises, of course, but there have been loved ones that have come out, and there's been an ectoplasmic voice box that's been created. And if you can imagine, I don't even know what voice boxes look like, but if you can imagine this glob that's a voice box that our loved one can actually push their face through, and they can talk again to their loved one. So with very, very, very specific information, people have been able to talk to their loved one. And they say the person speaking can't hear themselves, and we have to create with our mind what our voice sounded like. We do the best we can, I'm sure. We'll figure that out once we get there. But at my last conference, We Don't Die Orlando, I've done 2 now, We Don't Die Boston and one in Orlando, there was a mom and dad that were there. I had evidential mediums, Phil Dykes and Carrie McLeod, who did evidential readings. I had some others there as well that were great. But this daughter had come through in an evidential mediumship reading. And it was very moving. It was so detailed. And then another time there was a spirit artist there, and didn't she come through, and he drew a picture of her. And then Sonia Rinaldi, who's a scientist who captures pictures and voices from deceased. Well, the girl's face actually showed up in one of her trans images. And the cherry on top of the cake was in the actual seance. Both the mom and dad were there. And this daughter was able to talk to the parents again in such specifics. And there was even a nickname that the father had called the daughter that he alone called her. There's no way that information could have gotten out. And she had said, I can't remember what the nickname was, but I'm your little such and such, very weird name. And to hear that man just cry and cry and cry and have her talk about the memories that they shared. There was a couple that was at the Boston event and in the seance too, their son who was in the military and had died. He had come through in such evidence, and both parents had tattooed on their arms after the event, "We don't die," in their son's name, to really get that he's still around. He's alive. We just can't see them. So that's just a little taste of me going to the seances, but they're fun because there is a lot of laughter. There is a lot of singing, and that's all to raise the energy. Nothing to be afraid of, even though it happens in the dark. Nobody's poking at you or tickling you or anything like that. But to have these reunions between people, there's nothing like it. And in the old days, like I said, under like a little dim light, people could actually see their loved ones. And of course, we're all hoping that Scott's mediumship gets to that point. So yeah, there's the seance for you.
For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit bigseance.com. And you can continue the discussion and hang out with a great community of Paranerds by joining us in the Big Seance Parlor on Facebook. Want to hear your voice in a future episode? Go to bigseance.com/feedback to learn how. Thank you so much for listening. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time. Thank you to the following super Paranerds who support this show at patreon.com/big seance. Sue, Jen, Michael Henson, Daryl, Anne Marie Sullivan, Natalie N., Josia Lorenzo, and Susan Davey. My supporters at the Parlor guest level, who can be found at bigseance.com/parlor guests, are Anne Rekovich from OzParatech.com, Dina DeCastro of Dina DeCastro Astrology, Janae Michaels from Grey House Tarot and Farm Artifacts, Amy Park Gedicke of amyparkg.com, Lonnie Scott from WeirdWebRadio.com, Lana and John of Carbon Lilies, Midge Munster from MidgeMunster.com, Heather N. of DancingBeeAlchemy.com, Diane Razmataz, Stephen St. Amour, Tracy, Andrew Watson, Amy Taylor, Danielle Hemberry, Christine Rath-Selhe, Mindy Kintop, Hope Battaglia, Cass and Bailey, Melissa Armour, Janet Shaw-Binns, Bruce Williams, and Christopher Kohler. And I currently have 4 fabulous listeners who support the show at the $10 level, which isn't even a thing. Those Paranerds are Glenna Becker, Peggy Hagan, and Steve and the lovely Judy Skinner. Although I must say Steve is lovely as well. I also have 3 wonderful listeners who support the show at the completely made up $20 level. And those peeps are Norman and Linda Keller and Kevin Gilbert. Thank you, Paranerds.